You don't think I should bring them up
You
again
can
just to
if you
remind
want. You
myself?
can if you want. Look, it's shooting it raw. It's basically, it's a bit,
Okay, don't be too raw. Okay, it's not recording yet, is it?
of course.
Oh no, Ran, please don't record yet. Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw. This should be way more pleasant than going to the dentist. It'll be really fine.
Okay, cool.
Let's just assume that I am coming with the best intentions and the lowest of intellect, so you'll be just fine.
That's brilliant. I think photography, it captures moments in time and it's beautiful. It's like my brother once said the beauty of having a partner in life is to have a witness. And I think photography is almost a witness without a partner. Maybe let's put it that way.
I haven't heard that before. I haven't heard that before. It's fantastic. That's great. Jacqui
Just
Dixon.
made it up on the spot.
Jacqui. So am I. So am I. This is gonna be great. Okay, so Jacqui, thank you for joining me. We've known each other around cross paths for years now. I don't think I owe you any money, but we've known each other for a long time. So, the first photo that you sent me we're going to look about the Kids Ocean Day one, and it's a
Yes,
photo of a photo in a frame, right? So you've
yes,
got the mat. I'm just going to describe it because people are listening. So you've got the mat, right, of a framed photograph, and which is
yes,
white. And in it, there's a photograph made from high above, probably with a drone or a helicopter, and it's a photo of a beach. And on the beach, you can just see it almost looks like dots, really, and it's like of what looks like a dolphin, and then underneath that it says protect. And there are people on the beach, and it's this. I think I know this beach. It's called Repulse Bay in Hong Kong. So it's a nice little crescent, and you've got the
yes.
hills of Hong Kong, which are nice and green that spill in closer to the water. The beach is very sandy. Looks like a sunny but hazy day. And Kids Ocean Day. So we had Michael Klubak, right? Michael? Is it
Mm-hmm.
Michael? Yeah, Michael Klubak.
Yes.
And on
Malibu Foundation.
yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So we had him on the podcast, which was great. And so why do we start this conversation off with this photograph?
It's an interesting one. I think I sent this to you because I stare at it almost every single day with it being on my desk.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I chose to have this beautiful beach photo with that symbolic picture of a dolphin and the protect underneath it to sit on my desk, maybe as a reminder of my Hong Kong days, but also perhaps as a reminder of my duty in the world. And who knows whether I was born to work on ocean issues or not, but for some reason my life path has brought me here, um, perhaps in a slightly different way to how others on your program have brought them to their respective paths, those being on the more NGO activist side of things. I've gone very much the kind of the corporate route, which found me in the fishing industry while working in Hong Kong. And this particular photo was taken, yes, during the Kids Ocean Week, where Doug Woodring first approached us and asked if our company Pacific Andes would be interested in sponsoring the event. And it was basically to get a whole bunch of kids onto the Repulse Bay beach to form the formation of a dolphin. And obviously, the week prior to that, there was a lot of engagement happening at the schools, where Doug and Michael would deliver lessons and lectures, I suppose, but in a very informal manner, so as to be inspiring for children, to basically educate them about ocean conservation and all the things happening with our ocean out there. And I was really fortunate to be a part of it because I was working as a sustainability manager at Pacific Andes at the time, and I was the key contact point for them. And I basically mobilized for the company to sponsor it because I thought it was a really, really important initiative involving youth, plus a strong message to the Hong Kong community about the importance of protecting our oceans. And so for some reason, I've kept the photo on my desk. And I think it's just a very important reminder to me of having learned so much in the industry for all those years that I worked in it. And I continue to work in it, but not for a large fishing company anymore. I'm outside of the industry in that respect, but I'm still working with industry outside of them, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an important reminder to me of what I've been so lucky and blessed to have learned along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And even though sometimes, we might get sidetracked with other initiatives, or the problem out there might seem bigger than what we can even imagine. And is it worth all that effort? Are there some other low-hanging fruits that one put their energy and attention on in life? But it's a reminder to me that to just keep going, and eventually we're going to get there. Eventually, all stakeholders will be able to work together better. And the most important thing is to,
Yeah, well, you sound like an optimist. Would you describe yourself as an optimist?
I'm an eternal optimist, Ran. Oh my gosh. I think I was born an optimist. Apparently, at age 3, I was already packing my own suitcase and going off to school or whatever. No, honestly, I've just been such a go-getter from a young age.
Where were you born?
Born in Capetown.
Okay, and that's where that's where you are right now.
I'm back here, so having been, born and bred here for all those years. I left South Africa when I was about 23.
Okay.
First went to Nepal, and then after that, so I did a volunteering stint in Nepal.
Oh wow!
And then I went to live in London after that, and then I was a few years in London before I made my way to Hong Kong.
What brought you to Hong Kong?
What brought me to Hong Kong?
Or who brought you to Hong Kong?
Who brought me to Hong Kong? That's a better question. My boyfriend at the time, a German fellow, he had a great job opportunity in Hong Kong. And so he said, you've had your chance to travel, because I'd lived, 6 months in Nepal volunteering. And he says, now it's my turn. So let's go to Hong Kong. And so I agreed, and we moved there.
Oh, nice.
And it was one of the best moves of my life. And he did say to me, it will be better for my career than I can ever imagine. And it was so, so true.
Mm-hmm. So where did the intersection come with, so what did you study in university? I
studied environmental geographical science. So from a young age, I think it was when I was 14, I was writing a article or essay, would have been at the time, on river pollution. And I remember opening up, those old brown Britannica.
Yeah, Encyclopedia Britannica, yeah.
Encyclopedias. Encyclopedia Britannica, exactly. I opened one up, and on the river pollution, or whatever the title was, I was looking up. There was a picture of a river, and it was filled with rubber tires, plastic waste, you name it. And I think I burst into tears. I was sitting in my kitchen at the time, and my mom was there, and I just started crying, and I said, how could we do this to our planet? Like, what an awful thing. And I think from that point on, I always just knew, okay, I'm going to go into environmental science. So that's how I landed up at University of Cape Town from age 19 onwards. I studied environmental geographical science, and that was for 4 years. I did my honors degree, and then I kind of specialized during my honors year more in human geography, because that always fascinated me the most, was the intersection between people and the environment, and how we shape our environment so much as a human race. And so that's what got me there. And then I've decided, after doing my undergrad degree and my honors degree to do my master's. But that actually came a few years later in London. I did my master's at Forum for the Future, which focused on leadership in sustainable development.
So when I met you, it was probably, I mean, it was most likely through, well, I was sort of in working with shark rescue and how long had you been in Hong Kong before your kind of your work, so landed you in marine slash and then the conservation side of that of industry, right? So how
In the fishing industry.
right? So and being in Hong Kong, that is one of the reasons why I started Shark Rescue was because I knew that Hong Kong was like the trade hub really for global almost everything, right? So much trade happens here, and definitely in fisheries and shark products and that kind of stuff. So if you were to describe, so you've already kind of touched on it in terms of your values being, you are a conservationist, and yet your work as a scientist put you in sort of in line with industry and being more sort of optimistic or constructive or proactive. So how did that path land you here? Because by the way, when you said before, oh, compared to other, your path compared to the other people,
Yes.
well, everybody's
Yes.
path is unique. And everybody lands in
True.
however they land, right? So what's interesting
True.
for me to share with other people is that I know you're definitely, from the work that you've done, one of the good people, for sure. And so it's kind of, I think it's interesting to sort of share that evolution so other people can kind of see how you have manifested.
Oh gosh. First of all, I don't know if there is such a thing as good and bad people. I think we're all just people.
Okay.
First of all, and I think we migrate to that which we feel passionate about and what interests us in life. And I wouldn't even know if I'd call myself a conservationist. Gosh, even though I've been involved in conservation. Well, actually, one of my first jobs ever in Capetown was cheetah conservation.
Oh, wow.
Funnily enough.
Wow.
Yeah, that was right. That was my first job when I just left university before I decided to go overseas.
Wait, I have to interrupt. Have you ever had a cheetah lick your leg?
No.
Okay. No, the reason why I asked this, hold on, listen. The reason why I asked this is because I met this guy who had done cheetah conservation, and he says, you know how like your domesticated cats, when they lick you, their tongues are really rough. And I was like, yeah. And he said, well, cheetahs, they use their tongues to peel meat off the bone. So when this cheetah was licking his leg, it was extremely abrasive.
That's an exfoliation.
Yeah. So do you have any experience with that or no?
I haven't. No, I never used to feed them. So no. I was only I wasn't even a handler. I hadn't progressed high enough to become a handler. I was more of just the general educational spokesperson, I suppose. Speaking to the public about why cheetah outreach existed, the plight of the cheetah, etc. And then they'd have the handlers handling them.
Nice.
But anyway, yes, I can imagine. Yes, the tongues.
By the way, this is the podcast. This is the podcast. Totally random questions. Totally, whatever.
Yeah, totally random. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So you going back to your question about how did I land up on this side of the space of conservation, if you call this the conservation space, which is the industry of ocean issues, it's because I suppose of what I did before moving to the fishing world, because I didn't study marine biology, right? I studied environmental geographical science, which is certainly not focused in on marine biology, but I did actually do a bit of a specialism on freshwater science and freshwater systems, inland freshwater systems. But I think it's because I chose to go the corporate route quite early on. When I landed up in Hong Kong, I thought to myself, well, where do I fit in? I've got this master's degree in leadership for sustainable development from Forum for the Future. My heart, I felt, was more in the NGO space, given my background, I suppose, and my volunteering days at university also very much introduced me to the NGO world. But I felt to myself in Hong Kong, where do I actually fit in? And whether it was by chance or not, somebody mentioned a person's name in Hong Kong, Glenn Frommer, and he's known as the father of sustainability in Hong Kong. So this was a recommendation from London, a business that I'd been introduced to via my Forum Masters program. And my contact point there said, oh, get in touch with Glenn Frommer. You're moving to Hong Kong. And so he was the first person I contacted saying, can we have a coffee? And oh, by the way, as you know, Ran, Hong Kong is all about networking, right? And meeting people for coffee. Yeah. And if you don't have a business card, you don't exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that quite soon on having arrived in Hong Kong. I was like, oh, I better get a business card. Putting, Jacqui Dixon, master's student on there or something. I mean, it was so random, but you needed to have a title.
Sure.
So anyway, I met Glenn, and he was so kind and so open and supportive right from the beginning. And he said, oh, have you heard of Richard Welford from CSR Asia? And obviously talking to me for an hour, he figured out I would do quite well in that space. And CSR Asia was because they've been bought up by another firm called Elevate. But CSR Asia is a boutique firm, CSR kind of niche boutique CSR firm, working across Asia, multiple offices, but with a head office in Hong Kong at the time. And they were advising companies across sectors from, it could be apparel, textiles, retail, footwear, banking industry, you name it, everything you can think of. And anyway, so I landed up working for CSR Asia. Glenn was right. Glenn recommended I touch base with Richard Welford, which I did. I tracked him down at doing a lecture at the University of Hong Kong, and he was presenting on, and I remember so clearly, he was presenting on Nike at the time, and I think Nike had a big campaign against them on child labor, with procurement or purchasing of footwear, getting footwear produced in factories in China, and there was considered to be child labor involved. And when I heard Richard presenting on this, my heart started beating, and I was like, I've got to work for this guy. I'm going to learn so much. And so that's how I landed up tracking Richard down. And I said, oh, Richard, hi, I've just arrived from London, just finished Forum for the Future Masters. Jonathan Porritt, threw out the name. And Richard went, oh, Jonathan happened to be here a couple of months ago in Hong Kong, going to China on a trip there. And so he said, why don't you come in on Monday and then let's have a chat? And that's what I did. And then they started me on a project for the Shangri-La Hotels and Resorts. That was my first benchmarking project.
Oh, wow.
And from that point on, I was very much molded into the corporate social responsibility, corporate sustainability space.
Got it.
And I haven't left it since.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it okay if I use this pause to move on to the next photograph, or do you want to stay on this at this point? Because the next photograph...
No, let's move.
The next photograph I have is okay, let me describe it. Okay. Yeah. So it's titled Sustainable Seafood Symposium, and it's a photograph of a room that can hold probably about 100 people or so, and there's maybe about 75 to 100 people sitting in chairs. It's a symposium, so there seems to be a panel of about 2, 4, 6 people speaking off on the left-hand side. And there's a bunch of people just sitting at their writing notes, listening, paying attention. It seems to be a crowd in Hong Kong. Somebody hidden at the back is holding a microphone and asking a question, it looks like. And it's a sustainable seafood symposium. So why is this a keystone or a key image in your life?
In my life right now, I think because it's so current. You did ask for current photos, and it's also such an important part of my work at this present moment in my life. So the Sustainable Seafood Symposium, which is the picture captured there, we basically ran that in 2017 So I'd already moved back to Cape Town by then. After having lived in Hong Kong for 10 years and having moved from CSR Asia, I went into work in the fishing industry at Pacific Andes. And then towards my fifth year at Pacific Andes, I had a bit of a life change moment where my stepfather had a stroke. And I think it was a kind of a pinnacle point where I had some questions about where I should be in the world, and going home seemed to make the most sense. And it was a strong message basically saying time is short. And so that's how I transitioned back to Cape Town. But the company was really kind. They, because it was for family reasons and the Ung family, very family oriented, they said, carry on working for us, but from Cape Town. So that's how I transitioned back here.
Oh, wow.
But after having been home after a year or so, I slowly started moving more into projects here locally, and also working as a freelance consultant, having left Pacific Andes by then. And at that point, I got a phone call from George Woodman, who is from the Teng Hoi Conservation Organization, Teng Hoi, and he had participated in a symposium I had helped to arrange back in 2015 in Hong Kong when I was working in the industry. And we brought together a panel of experts to talk about illegal fishing, about sustainable seafood sourcing, and to try and educate the local Hong Kong buying community. So we're talking about corporate buying, company corporate buying, like retailers, hotels, seafood distributors, etc., about what sustainable seafood is all about, including a seafood tasting so that people could literally taste the difference, or you can't really taste the difference between a certified product and a non-certified product. So it was basically an educational symposium. And George called me up when I was in Cape Town saying, how about coming back to Hong Kong and organizing another one? And so that's how I landed up, as you do, that's how I landed up organizing the second seafood symposium, which we say is industry-led, because it was very much industry-led. It wasn't organized by an NGO originally at all. It was more the industry taking it upon themselves to educate the industry. So a big, large fishing company trying to educate other buyers and sellers of seafood on what is sustainable seafood. And so the second symposium was actually independent completely. It was funded by ADM Capital Foundation, and it was supported by Teng Hoi. And we basically pulled together the audience of about 100 or so people and managed to get experts from across the world to come and speak, again, on topics of illegal fishing. This time we brought in human rights, labor standards as well, because modern slavery is a big concern in the industry. Mm-hmm. And the issue of live reef fish trade, which is prevalent in Hong Kong. So we had Yvonne Sadovi speaking. And after, a few hours of this, the audience turned around in the afternoon and said, well, we know this is a huge concern. As buyers of seafood and as sellers of seafood, we know this is an issue, but we don't want to tackle this alone. I mean, it's an impossible issue to tackle this alone. The challenge is so enormous. So that's where Hugh Thomas from the UK, he was there speaking as an expert working at Pew Charitable Trust at the time. On IUU, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. Mm-hmm. And he whispered in our ears, into George and my ears, saying how you might want to consider for Hong Kong a model that has worked very well in the UK called the Sustainable Seafood Coalition, SSC. And at that point, George and I looked at each other and said, okay, let's go ahead. Let's suggest this. And to the audience, we might want to consider pulling together a coalition of sorts of the private sector to tackle these issues together. And that's exactly what we did. And there was interest, and we took that back and pulled together a symposium report and finally pitched the fact that, a sustainable seafood coalition in Hong Kong could potentially do very well. And that's how we landed up launching the Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition. So that symposium, that photo you're seeing, is actually a really important point in which the direction to move towards this private sector coalition was established.
Okay. Wow.
So it was a very important symposium, let's put it that way.
So in terms of the impact of that symposium in, and I know the past like year or 2 years has been completely topsy-turvy, but like looking at it now and looking backward, what is the real lasting effect? What can you say? What outcome would you be proud of that you would say, you know, this is something I'm very happy about that has lasted?
I think having 15 companies join us in the last 2 years, and really showing commitment to a sourcing code of practice, we call it. We've got these, this code of practice, code of conduct, voluntary codes of conduct on seafood sourcing and seafood labeling. The fact that these 15 companies have stepped up and, despite the challenges in gaining access to information down your supply chain, the traceability challenges, the challenges of identifying vessels of where the fish is coming from, etc. Despite this, they've put their names forward to say we're committed to this, and we know it's going to take a lot of time, but over time we want to move towards more transparent seafood supply chains. And I think that in itself is a success point. The fact that we've got these 15 companies that are committed, and we want to grow. We really, really want to double the numbers, say in the next year or two, and to have a force for good, I suppose, or a theory of change of which you can show the government in Hong Kong that if the private sector are willing to move on this, then let's make this a requirement for all.
Okay.
And this is a small cohort of private sector buyers and sellers of seafood, and some of them might not even be the largest in Hong Kong, right? Sure. We're talking about, medium-sized seafood distributors. But the fact is that they're willing to capture this information down their seafood supply chains and make sourcing decisions based on this. That is a sign, I think, for government policymakers to listen to and say, okay, well, if you guys are willing to do this, then let's make this a requirement more broadly. So I think that I suppose it's a hope factor. It's a hope that, this can influence things going forward.
To give some people maybe some perspective, has it happened that you go to a supermarket in Capetown and you see something that is somehow oddly enough linked back to Hong Kong, or does the supply chain not actually reach you?
No, if anything, it will be the other way around.
Okay.
So Hong Kong will be picking up products that are originated in South Africa. Okay. I mean, Hong Kong imports, I think numbers are so high. I mean, customs data shows the number of countries that Hong Kong's importing from, over 170 countries.
Oh, wow.
So you can 170 countries, and could be more, slightly more than that. We basically, there's research we want to do at the HKSSC, which we haven't managed to find funding for yet, but we want to map out the seafood trade flows in Hong Kong. So exactly where it's coming from, where it lands up, which warehouses it goes, it stops through to land up before it goes to a restaurant or retail shop or whatever it might be. Sometimes it goes direct from the airports, maybe perhaps to the restaurants. We don't know which wet markets it goes via. We want to map the whole thing out to make it easier for our members to be able to map their own supply chain. And that's the first point. And the second point is also then to have some recommendations for policy change. And so having initially looked into this, writing this proposal for the research and working with people like Yvonne Sadovi, it's been so helpful to find out customs data is showing that Hong Kong imports from over 170 countries. Sure. And South Africa being one of them. Now, in terms of the South Africa-Hong Kong link, there's multiple species that Hong Kong would be importing from South Africa.
Yeah.
Could be rock lobster. They like their live lobster in Hong Kong. But one very problematic species is abalone, and I suppose in a way that's why I feel so passionate about trying to make sure that this Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition is a success. And my direct interest, being based here in Cape Town, is to hear and to see how much abalone lands up in Hong Kong. So 90% of the abalone that is harvested here lands up in the east in Hong Kong, which then gets
Yeah.
re-exported
Yeah.
elsewhere. And 60% of that is regarded to be illegal.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's it's been poached. And this is coming from research done by Traffic and other NGOs, which have written excellent reports on this. So the status of abalone we know is very, very bad in South Africa, and yet it continues to get poached. And it's such a complicated beast to even try and tackle. And they've been trying to do it for many, many years, the NGO community with the government. But it's so caught up in networks and even the drug trafficking trade, and it's so complicated. And you kind of think, well, what role can the private sector play in terms of the purchasing side? And one thing that if the Hong Kong buyers of seafood could help implement, just asking for health certificates, number one. Where is that seafood coming from, and has it been through a processing facility? Because if it's been through a factory or processing facility which has got a legal health certificate attached to it, then you can pretty much know, okay, that comes from a legal source.
Yeah, it's traceable. Yeah.
It's traceable to a legal source. Whereas if it doesn't have a health certificate, it's pretty much illegal.
Sure.
It's been poached and dried through some informal facility.
Right.
So
I find it really funny.
But sorry, one thing, Rand, just to point out, currently health certificates are not mandated in Hong Kong. It's voluntary for the seafood trade. So that's it's a low-hanging fruit. If we can just make this mandatory across, let's just have this documentation trail across the seafood space, it would start making things a lot easier to secure sources from more legal sources.
Right. I always find it interesting to talk to people who are optimists. I'm an optimist, and yet, it's for the people who aren't optimists out there. I often find that people who do work like people like you, where the work is actually brutal and it's very upsetting if you sit and think about it, and yet somehow you're able to tease out this like path or tunnel or something of optimism that, there's light at the end of this really grim tunnel. Because look, I look at you. You're smiling. You're bright, and you're talking about this stuff that is making me basically cry inside, and yet it's amazing. It's amazing.
Well, I also, because I'm working in the industry space, I also get to hear some really good stories happening. The positives, the fisheries improvement projects happening on the ground, and what's being mobilized from the private sector world. And there's a lot of energy around this. I mean, the writing is on the wall. Buyers of seafood going forward are going to be asking more and more questions down their supply chain. So it makes kind of sense why those 15 companies have joined the Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition, because they see this as the future.
Right.
So they're just being a bit forward thinking. And I really believe that this is the direction we're all going to go in. Policies are going to start shifting and changing, maybe a bit slow in some countries than others, but we're all going to eventually move in that direction. And thank goodness for the activists on the ground. They bring the core issues to the fore, and even though sometimes it can be a pain in the ass for a company because it causes them so much headache, but essentially it brings out movement in the right direction.
Sure.
And I'm a big fan of transparency in that, even big fishing companies, great tool for fishing companies now, just like any company working in any sector, is a sustainability report, for example. So, all companies are producing sustainability reports and they're doing it well. Then any stakeholder should be able to read, what is that company culture like? What is the governance system like? What are the decision-making powers? Who's given decision-making powers, etc.? What committees exist at the board level to oversee environmental, social governance issues? What's happening throughout the departments? Are the departments talking to each other? Are they operating in silos? What are the policies on environmental, social, human issues? I think going forward, having transparency like that is really important, because then stakeholders can ask questions and they can point out flaws,
Mm-hmm.
and together everyone moves in a forward direction.
Sure.
If you've got no basis on which to have a conversation, because if no one's being transparent, stakeholders can't even ask questions
Sure.
because they don't even know what are
Sure.
you doing right, what are you doing wrong. But the more transparency there is out there, even with the criticism, it comes with that change and movement in the right direction.
Sure.
And I wish they would mandate that. I wish every country would mandate companies, listed companies and non-listed companies, to produce sustainability reports, because then you wouldn't have the problems that we see in South Korea with Ian Obina wrote that beautiful book, The Outlaw Ocean, which talks about the huge problems happening, human rights issues happening on vessels in certain fleets, certain countries.
Yeah.
And if there was more transparency amongst that company in particular, if they had to produce a sustainability report, for example, one could then start drilling a lot deeper.
Sure.
And say, well, what is this, a governance issue? Is it a culture issue? Where do we need to start putting change into the mindsets of certain executives, for example?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel that there's a lot of potential to be had in more transparency.
Sure.
And I see this all the time, so that's probably why I'm an optimist, because I do see positive things happening.
Let's move on to the next photo, because I can see the thumbnail, and it's the thumbnail. When I talk about the thumbnail, it's literally about 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, so I don't really know what's coming up, but I can just see the hints of a woman with blonde hair speaking to a microphone.
Okay, that's APEC days.
Let's
the
do
Asia
it.
Pacific Economic Cooperation.
Here we go. What is this photo?
Okay, that was me sitting there at the APEC table in 2014 when I was involved with the Policy Partnership on Food Security, PPFS.
What is APEC?
So APEC is basically the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. It's a intertrade body, policy-making body that had, I think there are about 24 countries a part of APEC. So everybody that borders the Asia Pacific region. So from Russia to China to Hong Kong to US. So any country that borders the Pacific. Mm-hmm. And basically coming together to improve trade policy.
Okay.
And I was involved. They had a private sector initiative. It's all governments, right? APEC is all usually governments. But they had one private sector initiative called the Policy Partnership on Food Security. I think it was one of 3 private sector initiatives happening, and this one was particularly focused on food. And because Pacific Andes is a very large seafood producer, very few of the scale like Pacific Andes you would find in Hong Kong. So they got asked if they would be if they want to be a part of this. And that's how Hong Kong, well, at least I got involved from the Hong Kong side, because Hong Kong being an APEC participant wanted 3 companies, and Pacific Andes was one of them. And the CEO, who was obviously the first person to get involved, and he saw how passionate I was about all of these, policy change and moving things generally in the right direction, that he suggested I continue engaging. So that's how I got involved with APEC. And I was there for about 2 years, going to meetings. And then eventually I was asked to chair one of the working groups on sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I love the interface between government, private sector, but I just loved the conversations you have and the discussions you have.
I need to pause. I just need to stick my head out the door. Get out, you cat! Get out, you cat! I know you're a troublemaker.
Are you talking to the kitty cat?
Say hi. We'll say hi. Hi, Jacqui. This is Pebbles. She's crazy.
Hi, Pebbles.
Okay, let's go back to APEC.
APEC.
So in this photograph, the room looks like. So describe the room. Like it. Are you seated at a sort of massive table? Like how many people? Like what was that event?
Okay, so that's a good question, because the APEC And I suppose you don't know until you're actually at the meetings themselves, but it kind of represents almost what you can imagine happens at United Nations meetings, where you have different countries sitting behind
Right.
their country name. It's exactly the same at APEC. You've basically got all the countries alphabetically written out around the table, so it's kind of an elongated long table, and then you have the representatives behind that country. So I was sitting behind Hong Kong, and there were a few of us there, a couple from the private sector, and that's basically how it looked. I was sitting next to Indonesia because I obviously comes after H. I had the Australians to my right and the Indonesians to my left. And it was really, really, really cool. I just found that I engaged effortlessly and easily with policy type people. Maybe I engage easily with most types of people, which is why I landed in the business space, because I can speak their language.
Right.
But I found one opportunity I had to do quite a lot of diplomacy because I was chairing one of the working groups. One thing I'd asked for the country states to send through were projects at the time, projects showing best practice in the region. And countries were starting to submit ideas and projects, and there was at one point where I got a phone call saying, okay, we might have to take those 2 projects off. And I had to be incredibly diplomatic
Sure.
To the country that had presented it to me to say for the reason for why we're going to be delaying putting that through. It just taught me there's a lot of diplomacy involved in these types of discussions. And one has to move slowly as well. Maybe I've got almost too much of an idealist vision. I think, we can all get there sooner than later, but actually things do take time. APEC made me realize things do take time.
Right.
And you can't rush things. That's for sure.
Okay. I'm not putting you on the spot at all. And, but one of the things that I understand is like, so on the one hand, you have this notion, for example, of a conservation notion, right? Like, so let's just say the government says, okay, no more shark fin at banquets in Chinese banquets or whatever, and they say by 2 years or whatever. So explain to somebody who doesn't know why things are what's seemingly so slow. So, for example, the excellent movie that came out this past year, Seaspiracy.
Yes, I don't know. Would I say it's excellent? I think some of the facts were questionable, but excellent, yes, in terms of raising awareness more broadly amongst consumers. So excellent in that respect. 100%.
Yeah. So the question though, so it's just that I understand that on the one hand, people really attach themselves to the result or the end of, we have to change, we have to fix, we have to do something dramatic. And yet, as your experience has shown, things do take time. Can you explain to somebody who hasn't been in these massive rooms with you, who doesn't understand the complexity of it, why do these things actually take, like, how complex is complex that these things do move forward so slowly? And if this isn't a good question, and you want to answer the smarter question, you raise the smarter question and answer that one. I'm a terrible interviewer.
No, it's a good question. It is a good question. Why some countries are moving quicker than others on policy? Let's put it that way. And I think it's very much a reflection of the consumer base. So where the consumers are.
Okay.
And so, for example, and also the activism. Let's put it that way. The activism on the ground also helps to push things in a certain direction. So for example, Europe, I would say, is far ahead in terms of sustainable seafood sourcing policies, etc., amongst the retailers and amongst the private sector.
Okay.
The US as well, very much so, and obviously, Australia. These are countries where NGOs have been incredibly active for a number of years. They've been campaigning, they've been bringing issues to the fore in a big, big way. and exposing companies. Greenpeace climbing on top of certain company roofs and dropping banners,
Yeah.
linking their sourcing to tuna fleets or horrible bycatch rates or whatever it might be. That has all had an impact.
Hmm.
That has definitely had an impact. The private sector has listened in a big way. And they're now partnering and working with a lot of these NGOs to make improvements in their seafood sourcing. At the same time, you've got a lot more consumer education perhaps happening on the ground in those countries where people are becoming more aware through seafood guides, rating guides, etc., about what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat. So that level of awareness is high.
Hmm.
And then you come to certain countries, maybe like Hong Kong. Yes, that level of awareness is getting there. And there's a lot more awareness now in Hong Kong than they say 10 years ago. Organizations like WWF have been very active for a number of years. They've got their own seafood guide. Even, shark fin research, still consumption rates are far too high
Hmm.
among the general population. But people are becoming more aware about conservation in general. And it's just a matter of time, while we need almost reach a tipping point where that can then start transitioning to influence
Okay.
government policy. But the NGO world, I would say, in Asia is just not as strong.
Okay.
We haven't seen that level of activism. So I think it's two things. It's consumer demand plus it's a strong civil society. We haven't seen that strength in civil society on the ground in places like Hong Kong, for example, to really have significant shifts in private sector policies and government policy. So that's how you can move faster or slower. And I think civil society is a very big indication of that.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Thank you. That was great. That was great. Because I think for a lot of people on the outside, trying to hang their thoughts or try to really get their heads around it, it just seems so either because it's complex, people want it to be cut and dry or something. So there is definitely that sort of inner tension that I think once you have somebody like yourself who's actually inside, who's really facing the complexities and facing the challenges, and really kind of getting granular in terms of what's actually happening and what's really needed and what really needs to change. I mean, I think that's invaluable, right? And because I said that's invaluable, I think I just created the perfect segue to the next photo, because I think it dovetails really nicely into another project that you care about. And do you know which photo I'm talking about?
Yeah. The art of living.
Yes. Fantastic.
You asked me for current photos, and so I sent you a current photo. It was actually a flyer. The flyer.
Yeah. Well, where's your head at these days? So this is like the art of living. Now it's like a flyer, and it says online meditation and breath workshop, with Jacqui and Sabine. Master your mind and live your best life. And the photo is a sunset on a beach with a woman just jumping, like getting serious air with her feet back and her arms splayed, like sort of up in the air, and just looking just so happy with, bullet points of reduce stress, reduce anxiety, sleep better. So this has arguably a completely different direction than the previous three photos. So what is it? Please let us into your world. What am I looking at?
Yeah, my polar opposite pastime. So, yeah, during the day I work as a corporate sustainability consultant and advisor, technical advisor to the Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition, and I'm also on the steering committee. So that's all my day job, right? And I also do work for a local firm here called Insight, where I where I get opportunities to work with local companies here in South Africa. But that's all in my daytime. In my spare time, I'm an art of living teacher.
Oh, wow.
And that's yeah, I'm basically a happiness program teacher. It's called the happiness program. And now that with COVID, everything's had to transition online, so which is why we have these online meditation and breath workshops, hence the flyer
Mm-hmm.
that you have advertising our course, I think that we had in June. And yeah, Sabine is my co-teacher. We've kind of partnered together during the COVID period. We've been teaching every month, once a month for the past year
Oh, wow.
during this period. And it's been so much fun. Yeah, very cool to go online and teach these courses. And yeah, it's all about breath work. So we take people through, the breathing technique called the Sudarshan Kriya or Sky technique. And it's a rhythmic breathing that really gets them to release stress down to the cellular level. And to be able to sit there silently and quietly and meditate, basically. It's so hard to meditate. People sit and they say, oh, I try and meditate. My mind is so busy. And this is exactly what the breathing technique helps one to do. It helps them to sit quietly and just to get back in touch with their true nature. So I really love teaching. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So how did that evolve out of your head? Look at your face. Look at your face. You totally smile. It's great. Look at you. Nice. I like it.
How did I find the art of living? Well, I had already discovered yoga practices when I was 21. My mom had asked me when I was still at university. My mom had said, "Oh, there's this thing called yoga happening down the road.
Okay.
This thing called yoga. Do you want to go and try it out?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, why not?" So I went along to a class with my mom, and it was in the back of somebody's house. It was in their garage. This woman, Carol, was teaching Iyengar yoga at the time, and we totally loved it. It just made so much sense to stretch the body in these different postures and to have that space just to decompress and to reflect. And it just made a lot of sense. And it made us feel good. It really made us feel good. So so that was my first introduction. And then I carried on practicing yoga throughout my adult life until, even into Hong Kong days. I was still going actively to yoga classes. And then at one point, a friend came over and visited me. She was coming from Canada at the time, and she said, there's this breathing course called The Art of Living. Are you interested in maybe doing it? And I was working as a consultant at CSR Asia at the time, so stressed out, working probably almost 6 days a week, out of choice, because we're very passionate as sustainability consultants. So and I needed something to balance that. So I did the breathing course, and I absolutely loved it.
Nice.
And I never looked back. And I've been practicing it every morning since then, 12 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And it was only when I transitioned back to South Africa that I decided to become a teacher.
Oh, wow.
Because one of the senior teachers here took me aside and says, "Why are you not teaching?" And I was like, no, I teach yoga on the side, because I got my yoga teacher training while living in Hong Kong. That was another thing I discovered, or another thing I pursued, to do yoga teacher training for integral yoga, which I absolutely loved. It was one of the best decisions of my life. And I was teaching that a little bit on the sides. And he said, "Well, why are you not teaching Art of Living?" And I said, "Well, I teach a little bit of my integral yoga here and there." And he said, "Do you know how many people are stressed out in South Africa? Do you know how high the crime rate is? Do you know how high the depression rates are and anxiety?" And he says, "We need a lot more teachers." And so he kind of roped me in that way, and I was like, "Okay, fine." And then I landed up on the teacher training program, and I loved it. And it's true, there's so many stressed out people, so we do need more teachers.
So is it only for people in South Africa who can, like, if somebody who listens to this and thinks, Jacqui is that special kind of crazy, weird, eccentric, whatever, that they want to kind of participate, is it purely in South Africa, or can you actually people from around the world?
It's from all around the world. I think they've got in more than 150 countries now.
Sure.
So you can go and visit an Art of Living center in Hong Kong, in India. Obviously, it comes from India. In the US, in Canada, in Argentina. There's a huge following in Argentina.
Oh, wow.
You think I'm quite enthusiastic. My gosh, you must meet the Argentinians. They fly high. we call it prana, which is prana is a subtle life force energy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in us, all of us. But the higher your prana, the higher your energy. So those Argentinians, my word, yeah, they're full of prana. Anyway, so you can find these courses absolutely anywhere. And the beauty is once you've done it, usually it's kind of almost for free to continue doing it, the same
Okay.
course over and over. So, and you plus you get a weekly, we call them long career catch-ups. You do a weekly session for an hour, and it's almost like you have a reboot, like a
Sure.
holiday,
Yeah, yeah.
just in that 1 hour, like you've gone off for a vacation and back again. So every week you get that catch-up for free. So it's just a really good balance to a busy life, put it that way.
So, okay, so I met you through CSR Asia at one of the events, and you're one of the presenters. And then years ago, and then life just happens, and you ended up in South Africa, and we reconnected, and then I said, okay, let's have you on the podcast because it'd be great. And so one of the main themes or the drivers actually of the podcast is that life is a gift and that we can make
Mm,
the most out of every second. We can make every second count.
mm,
And one way of putting it is mindfulness. So, for example, ending on this note of the art of living, how
mm.
about, or would you like to use this moment to make that connection either across your life? So from the photograph of the beach with the,
Mm.
World Ocean Day, your work, and then all this, because the 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 common denominator across all of it is you,
Mm.
right? It's like who you are is, these are just expressions of who you are. So how would you connect, what would you say to somebody to have them go, hey, wait a second, let's connect with the art of living, or let's connect with making, you know what I mean, like
Mm.
something optimistic.
Mm. I think actually, Rand, that's a very beautiful question.
I asked a
Because you
question.
basically said, you asked a question, I heard a question there, and it was, how do we see life as being an eternal gift? And I think, you know, and I said earlier, by tapping into your true nature, so I mean, into that calm and peaceful state of mind where you can then be in a more positive state of mind, um, which is more your true nature, right? We get stressed in life because of how busy we get and things that are putting demands on our time, and but it's usually our mind linking to that. It's just the attachments that we have. If we
Hmm.
actually learn how to detach in that busyness, we can remain in that calm state no matter what's happening around us. And the more our energy is enhanced and the more that positivity is enhanced, the more active we can get in general. And the more purposeful we become and perhaps useful for society. And to answer your question, how do we see life as this eternal gift? One thing I did want to bring up is the act of volunteering.
Okay.
Um, and I think when we tap into our more true positive self, and we want to go and do things for the world, we're no longer just focused on ourselves, but we're actually looking a little bit more beyond ourselves. So into
Hmm.
the community. First, it's your family. You do service for your family. So you're active volunteering for your family. You're looking after your kids. It's the biggest service anyone can do in this world, I think, is bring kids to look after them, to allow them to
Hmm.
grow up and to have healthy, safe lives so that they can become adults and live out their true calling in life. But then even beyond that, you're looking at your community, you're looking at broader society, and then you're looking at the broader world. And for me, it's that sense of belongingness that you have. So with your
Hmm.
family, it's obvious you're connected to them. There's a lot of belongingness. Then you're looking at your community. How much is that sense of belongingness with your community? I think how active you are in that community is your sense of how much belongingness you have with them. And then society at large, and then the world at large. And when you start to feel that belongingness with absolutely everyone and everything, you start taking responsibility for it.
Sure.
And that's really where things, I think, start moving in the right direction, is when everyone is taking responsibility for any problems that we have in the world. So not just, leaving it to somebody else to figure out. but you actively can get involved in whatever it is. And it just, the sense of purpose you get from that as well is incredible. You just get this energy boost from being actively involved in some volunteering initiative or some project. So I would really highly recommend anyone with any skill in life, whatever it might be that you've been born with, go and give it out freely, because the world needs it and you need it.
You're great. Jacqui, thank you so much. That was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Gosh, Ran, it's such a pleasure.
Okay, listen.
Okay, it's such a pleasure. Thank you.
I thank you so much. I am going to actually use this moment now to go volunteer my time to go take care of my daughter, because I have to drive her to a different thing.
That's such an act of service.
Okay, thank you so much, Jacqui. Have a great day.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ran. Okay, take care.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting.